Welcome to another episode of the Music Musings Podcast. This time it's going to be a half step episode, just with me. Sorry, guys. Derek is enjoying his 3-day weekend elsewhere. I'm enjoying it in Niagara Falls, Canada, overlooking a beautiful, gorgeous landscape. Just enjoying the time with the fiance and the family. Gotta say, if you guys come here, you got to try the Molson beer. It's just great. But yes, I couldn't stop. I couldn't let you guys not have an episode because we're out doing our own separate things. But of course, we're always behind the scenes doing all kinds of magic stuff for you guys. I really do appreciate you checking out the website. It means a lot to both of us. We love the engagement. We love the feedback. It's fun. It's amazing. Please, keep being involved. It means a lot to both of us. And we're going to keep rocking and we're going to keep improving every single time. But before we get into this episode, let's talk about the musings of the week. Now, for myself, I've been vibing with Bob Sinclair. Now, Bob Sinclair is a famous house music producer. I think mostly got his rise in the early 90s. He's very, very, classic house music, definitely heavy on samples, but used in unique ways. If you guys get a chance, check it out. I think his album, just self-titled Bob, is a very good listen if you guys give a chance. Next on my list is Donna Summers, one of the legends from the disco funk soul era. And, I refuse to be argued with. She is, a titan, a legend in her own right. And I think no one really is going to argue with me. Anyone that does, I'll judge you. But no, she is wonderful. I've been listening to I Fell in Love. I've just vibed with like that, that powerful vocal experience that she brings to every single track. It's just great. Next on the list is Girl in Red, this alt indie artist. I don't know, it's just something about it. I've been listening to, Bad Idea, Girls, We Feel in Love in October. She has a song with Sabrina Carpenter. If you guys, just give her a check out. She's fun, amazing. If you love that indie alt sound, she's perfect for that. And last but not least is Becky G. Now, I've been vibing to those Latin artists for almost a decade, and she's got a new album coming out. But I've been listening to some of her old stuff, and obviously her new single, Epa. It's great, a vibe. It starts off kind of like a house track, which is why I kind of like it. But if you guys give it a chance, I think she will not disappoint you. So now let's get to the meat and potatoes. So we're going to turn down the lights a little bit, but not too low because, I need to see, and we all do. But turn the speakers up and let's go back in time to the future. I know that doesn't make sense, but let's get into our first segment. What did the futuristic sounds sound like to the past? What does that mean to them, and why was it important? So let's start in the beginning. In my opinion, the 70s, as always. The Voyage. The future in music really started to take shape in the 1970s. I'm talking about we're looking at the pioneers who are testing limits of whether it's genres, whether it's instruments, whether it's technology, whether it's humanity, whether it's artistry. Take your pick. They were challenging each other and challenging themselves and experimenting with all kinds of unique ways. So, like in the 1970s, pop culture was looking towards the future. We're talking about the moon landings, Star Wars, technology, and computers was becoming, a start to become a conversation in society before, like today, which is normal, but to them, it was like a beginning of fresh air for we're going to bring in tech into our daily lives instead of it just being in the hands of the government or, very expensive scientists who have the ability to have that. But the conversation of technology and computers becoming more integrated was starting to become the norm, or the idea of it is starting to become the norm. And people were interested in it. So if people are looking towards the future with, flying cars, then artists were already dreaming of exploring the sounds of the future. And we're going to start asking ourselves, what is future music? All right. Now, a lot of futuristic music actually comes from simplicity, unusual textures, fearless experimentation, emotionally honesty mixed with technology. These songs that age best are usually aren't trying to chase a trend. They're trying to invent a new reality or a new dimension. An example of how artists are experimenting sounds of the future, they began exploring with synthesizers. Now, we've talked about in the past how much I would love to have my hand on a Moog synth. It is definitely a dream of mine, and crazy expensive, but there's so many unique aspects to the synths. There's so much warping of the sounds, and that's kind of like the futuristic vibe that certain people are starting to look at. So these instruments are now becoming the tools for building entire worlds, if not galaxies, which in turn, inspired me myself to be inspired to do this, to do electronic music, just like everybody else, and including, of course, the legends themselves, Daft Punk. But we'll circle back to them in a little bit. But right now, we're in our time machine and we're still stuck in the 1970s. So when we're talking about one of the biggest names in like futuristic music and sounding, it's got to be Kraftwerk. Now, this German group basically helped invented the sound of electronic pop, techno, and if anything, influenced hip hop and modern dance music. Their music was cold, clean, robotic, yet at the same time still human. Now, they were building something completely new. Everybody was like, what is this? I don't understand, but it's so magnetic. And that's why they were able to craft pun intended, were able to craft a lane for themselves where they were able to stay in the sound because of how experimental they were. And, obviously, when we're talking about like experimental in the 70s, everybody knows David Bowie's got to come up in that conversation. David Bowie, in my opinion, is an artist from the future. I consider him a time traveler. He's a time traveler that came from the future and said, you know what, I'm gonna check here in the 70s. I'm just gonna vibe out here. All right. This guy was considering the sounds of the future as a part of his usual sounds, such as Starman and Space Oddity. Space Oddity. And if you guys have a chance, please go check those out. I will add those into the Music Musings podcast playlist on Spotify. So if you guys want to check out some of these songs, I highly recommend it. Uh, it's David Bowie, legend, but I don't have to really explain that. So, David Bowie is also like creating alter egos. He's genre fluid. He's always about self reinventation, like fashion is like identity performance, blending art, music, theater, and film. Like he's using so many different elements of what we consider like art. And I gotta say, like at the time, 1970s, they were really experimenting. If 60s, they were doing that with Woodstock, but I think the 70s were like, we're really, really looking at this. And this is where, when we keep going a little further, then we got to bring up Donna Summers. All right. We got to bring up, I brought her up before, she had a song called I Feel Love. And it is, in my opinion, one of the greatest examples of future sounding music pretty much in the 70s and if possible ever. Now, with Donna Summer's I Feel Love, this landmark record utilized a driving sequenced Moog synthesizer, as I mentioned before. It is widely considered like the blueprint for modern electronic music and techno, and banning, like the traditional disco instrumentation entirely, where we're used to the live bands, the bass, the drums, and a little bit of the funky electric guitar doing all the work. They were using synths and saying, you know what, we can craft unique electronic sounds. And the person that we got to bring up who crafted this wonderful orchestra of music and electronic sounds was Giorgio Moroder. Now, some of y'all wondering, who is Giorgio Moroder? Moroder, sorry, I'm pronouncing it wrong. They consider him the father of disco. Moroder is credited with pioneering Euro disco, electronic dance music. His work with synthesizers had influence on several music genres, such as like Italo disco, synth pop, new wave, house, techno music, the whole works. So Moroder like championed the use of synthesizers and drum machines as primary rhythm sections in pop, like fundamentally shifting music away from traditional acoustic arrangements. Now, like I said, the 70s were like obviously full swing of experimentation. Everybody's trying all kinds of unique things. And the fact that they said, you know what, drums, guitar, we're gonna keep experimenting, but let's look at the future. What is the future? Moroder said, I got it. I got it. Let's take it from here. I got it. And he delivers. And he goes on to obviously, I'll bring him back up in a little bit, but he was an instrument in the future of just like the modern concept of how disco works and going towards the future. We're talking about electronic music with house music is pretty much just the beginning. I'm sorry, the child of disco. It always been considered that, but some people tend to forget that. So, you know, consider yourself you learned a lesson today. Now, we're moving on a little further into the next decade, the 80s. We're talking about neon dreams and digital echoes, all right? By the 1980s, futuristic music got shinier. It got a little more sparkly. The machines got brighter, the drums got tighter, the whole decade started to sound like neon lights reflected off of glass skyscrapers. It's all vibes. Synth wave is coming into the conversation. So many elements of different sounds are blending together. And the 80s were like saying the technology can really transform how we look at not just music but the world. So that optimism, created sounds that are like robotic yet human, cinematic, emotional, synthetic, yet it felt like it was building worlds with their music. And, the production, like we were talking about from the 70s, where obviously it was mostly, equipment, bass guitar, drums, all that. Now they're looking at production with more with computers, and we're talking about synthesizers are now becoming the mainstream. They're becoming what is considered the usual go-to production tool. Now, drum machines instead of drum kits started to become more common in singles and pretty much music. We're talking about like the Roland TR-808, and if you ever get your hands on one of those, consider yourself one of the luckiest human beings on the planet. If I ever get my hands on one, I must be rich, but I'm not, so I don't. But we're talking about so much powerful like sounds that are like right there, and then you can morph it, you could warp it, you could put it through a filter. I'm over here geeking out, but it's amazing if you get your hands on a drum machine from the 80s, especially a Roland. Now, with these like technologies, also we got to bring up the fact that reverb became more common. Reverbs are becoming like more on the vocals or even instruments, but mostly on the vocals. They become more cinematic, they're dramatic, they feel larger than life. Samples, or samplers should I say, these machines are now able to chop up vocals, strange yet cinematic textures, experimental sounds. It's like creating this atmosphere that is like otherworldly, and it's amazing. So I have to give it to the 80s. As much as everyone knows how much I love the 70s, the 80s took the concept of what the 70s was trying to do and it's like, hey, we can bring technology a little bit more into the music aspect in terms of like new sounds. And they were like, 80s was like, yeah, sure. That's it now. That's what we want. And it became what we hold very dear. And, music became tighter, more layered, more programmable. Programmable. Can't speak really well. Had a Molson tonight. And mechanically more precise. So we're having much more like production value is becoming more crisp. It's because the computers are able to replicate sounds a little bit faster, a little bit simpler, and it's consistent. And now you can possibly morph it. Maybe you want to, like I said, maybe you want to play with how the sound is, rolled out. That's when like, sine waves are much more useful when you're releasing the sound. Like you can play it and then it'll go through a filter and it'll warp out as it releases. I know that sounds kind of weird, but in my head it makes sense because I'm used to doing it. But that's how it happens. And then we got to bring up, if we brought up David Bowie in the 70s, there's no way I couldn't bring up the Prince. Prince. All right. Prince was futuristic with just everything, but not just synths and drum machines. It was just his attitude, the confidence, the way he took technology and turned it into something sensual, playful, and powerful. One of the kings of this era, like just could make funk, rock, pop, electronic music feel like they all belonged in the same galaxy, genre, whatever you want to call it. Songs like 1999 and When Doves Cry still sound like very sharp and innovative today. We're like, these sounds are just like otherworldly, as I said before, and obviously in the hands of somebody who's like just a gifted prodigy, whatever you want to call it. This is this guy. And in his hands, just another instrument that furthers his artistry and his vision. And you know what? I love it for it. I love every aspect of it. And, this decade, like I said, just it became so like there were so many artists that were trying to be the next envision of the future. Like obviously we're talking about the 70s, we're talking about Star Wars and all these unique movies and concepts of the future. Back to the Future was from the 80s, and as well as, the DeLorean, which was like unique car. I'll leave it there. But another artist in the 80s that was giving a little bit otherworldly with their music, and especially her music was definitely used in Stranger Things. Still upset at the last season. Kate Bush, her songs like Running Up That Hill felt emotional, cinematic, but also strange and inventive. Like she used technology to not hide feeling, but to deepen it. That is a huge part of futuristic music. It's not about just sounding robotic and like easy to replicate, but it's about making emotion feel bigger, stranger and more powerful than ever before. It's about how can we be more honest about ourselves. Yes, these sounds sound like something that comes straight out of a comic book or out of like the Jetsons if you watch the 90s cartoons, but they were all about like yes, there's a lot more convenience, but at the same time, let's not lose our humanity. So the 80s was definitely trying to mask that. So going on to our next segment, does the futuristic sounds hold up in our modern times? And what is modern's music view of the future? Now, here's the simple question. Does it hold up? Does it really reflect the future? If you're asking me, I know everyone's asking themselves. They have their opinion. And in my opinion, the short answer is yes. Why? Four reasons: originality, implementation of technology, confidence, and what is your goal? Now, originality. You're talking about creating a sound nobody has heard before. It can age in a weird way, but because it ages doesn't mean it has to belong only to that time frame or that era. Something from the 70s, like I said, Donna Summer's I Feel Love, if you told someone that it was made in the 90s or the 2000s, you'd be like, yeah, I believe it. It's just because of how it was orchestrated and how much it was designed to last the test of time. That is originality. You're unique to yourself. No one can easily replicate that. Now, implementation of technology, whether it is a synthesizer, a drum machine, or vocal effect, the tool had a purpose to bring the idea of a futuristic sound. Now, we talked about, like I said, the gated reverb. We're talking about all kinds of unique sounds. We're talking about moving, a sound through a synthesizer through a unique wave, or warping it, or playing it in a different, a lower, pass, a filter. I'm talking about low pass, through a filter. These things matter. So the fact that they saw technology and were like, this is another tool. I see a bass guitar, I see a synth, I see the same thing. I see a tool that can implement a sound that is very specific, and they're using it to create music designed to push the idea of futuristic, you know, music into to ears of the masses. And I love that for them. Now, and the next thing, third one, confidence. Futuristic sounding music usually comes from artists who aren't afraid to really, to be misunderstood at first. To be different takes very much confidence. When everyone else is doing A and you choose to do B, yeah, the world kind of looks at you a little different. But if you really believed in your vision and you went on B, you know what? B might be the long run game plan that actually works out. Sometimes it's okay to take a bet on yourself. Sometimes it's okay to take a chance and try. And we've seen that with artists. We've seen that with artists trying all kinds of unique things. And the fact that they have the confidence to believe in themselves, despite the whole mainstream machine is telling them, like, no, make pop music this way or make your rock sound, like this way. And it takes confidence to say no. It takes confidence to say, I have an idea, I'm sticking to it, nothing's changing. Now, last but not least, the fourth reason, in my opinion, is goal. The best futuristic sounding songs are not trying to predict the future like science fiction. They're simply imagining something different from the present. They don't have a specific goal in mind. They're not saying, like, this is how the future is. They are not saying that. This is their perspective of, and out of the multiverse of ideas, of dimensions, and other realities, they were trying something. And this is amazing. And it takes, like I said, confidence. But all four of these things, like I said, play a factor into another. But having the idea to say, this is my vision, and I'm putting it in the world. And my vision doesn't have to match yours, but it is different from what everyone else is doing. And this is what I see in my eyes. And I love that. So now let's move on to the next thing. Modern music, what is their view of the future? Now we're talking about modern artists, right? We're talking all kinds of genres and, pushing the landscape, and there's a lot of great music today, and and there always will be great artists and bands. They're everywhere. Sometimes they're a little harder to find depending on what your preference is, but they're everywhere. There's always someone creating music. There's always someone challenging their genres, rules, or pushing the boundaries of what a human being in their artistry can do. But what is their view of the future? I'm going to bring up some simple ones. Now, when I brought up Giorgio Moroder earlier, I have to bring up Daft Punk. Now, if you don't know, Daft Punk have definitely worked alongside him on, was it Homework or Random Access Memories? And Derek is probably like very upset at me, the fact that I'm not referencing it right off the top of my head, and I apologize. But nonetheless, they worked well together. Daft Punk was very much inspired by his work, especially in the 70s, and everything he's involved in Euro disco, or slowly become Euro electronic music, or their version of it, over the past couple of decades. So Daft Punk definitely wanted to work alongside them and work alongside him, and obviously use some of his music. And if anything, there's a part in one of his songs, one of their albums, I think is Giorgio by Mortar, which is a funny title, but it's literally just a kind of like a monologue about him explaining how his music production process was. And like I said, it's fantastic. But back to Daft Punk. Daft Punk, their view of the future is within their artistry. It's ambiguity. It's part of why they feel futuristic. They sit right on the edge between identity and technology. So it's hard to figure them out, because they are like, we're machines just creating music. Don't look at me. And then you got like artists like The Weeknd, which is like retro futurism in pop form. Then you got Radiohead, a band that blends electronic textures, replacing traditional rock with abstract and fragmented sounds. Then you got like a pop artist like Grimes. Her music feels like it belongs in a space colony diary. Like you just find it like in some sort of like, I don't know, like apartment that's like floating above a moon. I don't know. I'm just just creating something. But these are like what they are. These are the view of future in their artistry, in their eyes. Now, you're asking yourself, how come there's like a few artists that actually, experiment with the concept of futuristic music or futuristic sounds? And I say, and this is my opinion, and you can definitely let me know your opinion on the website, like I said, or, if you want to shoot us an email directly, musicmusicspodcast@gmail.com. But it's just easier to use the website. You could just shoot a message right away. Most artists today, in my opinion, and this is going to sound like a complex oxymoron, I don't, most artists today, their view of the future is looking at the past. And I know that sounds confusing, but hear me out. It's not because their identity of the future it's not because they don't like know what they want, or actually, I'm sorry, correction. They're not sure of what they want. They're a little confused, because if everybody's sounding like everybody, how do you sound like the future? So what they've been doing lately is not really challenging themselves. Personally, they are challenging themselves on the technical aspect, but they're actually becoming more nostalgic. They're more interested in the past than the present, or the future. They're, with them looking into the past, they're leaning into discovering themselves and asking, what are they searching for? I'm going to give it quick examples, and I hope I don't step on anybody's, toes when I say this. And this is not a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. It's okay to try to figure out what you're trying to do. What do you want to do? Tori Kelly's single Control, which by the way, love it, is a carefully crafted and well-produced song from the 90s R&B with a cleaner version of the 90s hip hop drums. It's great. It's wonderful. It sounds like a really well-produced version and cleaned up modern remaster of a 90s R&B song, but it's her thing, but it sounds like something you've heard before because you've heard it in the 90s or heard it in maybe the early 2000s. But, that's okay. She's experimenting, and that's fine. Bruno Mars with Silk Sonic, with Anderson .Paak, and then also The Romantic. Great albums, by the way, and fantastic music. But it chases the 70s and the nostalgia with excellent talent. They're all, Anderson .Paak and, Bruno Mars are excellent. They're talented, phenomenal. And they crafted some great music. And then also with The Romantic with Bruno Mars, I've listened to it a few more times. It's not as fantastic as Silk Sonic, but it's still a great body of work. However, we're talking about nostalgia. We're chasing the past, and they're playing safe instead of challenging the elements of reality, which is looking forward. So, with everything that's going on, I feel like people are more leaning towards nostalgia. They're leaning towards, how can I be more accepting of, music of the past and bringing it to the future? How can I just be comfortable with myself? How can I do that? But before you can do that, you have to look at the past. And I will say this, there's a great movie, and if you ever get a chance, called The Holdovers. There's this impactful quote. He said, "History is not simply the study of the past, it is an explanation of the present." And I think modern artists and musicians are studying and asking themselves a very important question about the future of their genres and, if anything, the future. So that's why like Kraftwerk sounds like a blueprint, while Daft Punk sounds like a digital dream. Why David Bowie sounds like a time traveler from the future explains why The Weeknd sounds like someone driving a DeLorean. See, brought it back to the future. I know what I'm doing. Might add a Molson, but I know what I'm doing. But that's why like it's important to challenge yourselves. And I think artists are going to start eventually doing that. I have faith that modern artists are going to start pushing the boundaries. I think they all do. They definitely do a genre blending sound. Certain artists do blend genres. You know, we brought up Little Nas X. He blends hip hop and country music and pop. It's amazing, but that's what he does, and that's okay. And we don't know what the future looks like or what this sounds like, but they're trying. They're making an attempt, and that's what I want. I want them to take the leap. The leap may not work out, but it's okay, because at the end of the day, you tried, and I respect that more than someone who plays it safe. So if I really thank you guys for rocking with me on this half step episode. I promise you, Derek and I we're still doing great things for you guys. I miss my music partner in crime. It's great. Listening to the futuristic sounds from the past and hearing how they view the future from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I just mainly talked about the 70s, 80s, and it's great. And if you have a chance, please go listen to Random Access Memories by Daft Punk if it's possible, and you have the authentic experience on a vinyl like Derek. By the way, I'm completely jealous of you. I love that speaker system, man. It's just it's fantastic. Yeah. So if you guys want to take a chance, go listen to that. I'm gonna upload the songs into the music podcast Spotify playlist. Go. Hey, just give yourself a chance. Listen to some new music. And side note, the Mets are still the best, even though they lost 2 times to the Marlins. I'm never going to stop wearing my Mets jersey. Until then, guys, see you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you have an idea for an intro or an outro that we could play on our show, please send to musicmusingspodcast@gmail.com.
If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please email us at musicmusingspodcast@gmail.com.